Hi everybody. So thanks again for joining us today, and we have a minute out, but meanwhile let me just start by welcoming you and thank you for joining us today. This is the third webinar in our 4-part Fraud Prevention Summer Bootcamp series. And if you attended the previous 2 webinars, thank you. And if you're joining us today for the first time, I'll just explain that this webinar series is meant to help prepare e-commerce fraud operations for the holiday season, with each session focusing on a different aspect of fraud management. And today we'll be spending the next 30 minutes sharing some advice based on our own experience here at Riskified about ways to optimize the manual fraud review process, making it more efficient and accurate so as to drive sales during the holidays while avoiding fraud. So before we start with the actual webinar, let me briefly introduce Riskified and myself for those of you who are not familiar with us. So Riskified is an end-to-end e-commerce fraud prevention solution. We've been around since 2012. Helping merchants manage or avoid CNP fraud by reviewing transactions and covering all orders we approve with full chargeback guarantee in case we made a wrong decision. My name is Shalhevet, and I'm the content manager here at Riskified. With me on the line today is Alon Stein, a senior fraud analyst on our team.
Hi everyone.
And at the end of today's session, Alon will help answer any questions any of you may have for us about manual fraud review or any other questions that might come up during today's session. And to just give some quick context of who we are and why we feel we're in a good position to provide tips on optimizing fraud operations. So this flowchart or visual illustrates basically our process, how merchants work with us. So merchants decide which orders to submit to us. Our systems instantly analyze submitted orders for fraud using multiple fraud detection technologies and provide a clear approve or decline decision. And our analysts, our expert analyst team, review the borderline cases and help us optimize the machine learning models. We guarantee higher approval rates than what merchants previously achieved and put our money where our mouth is, backing every approval with insurance in case of a chargeback. We've been fortunate enough to work with some great brands across verticals, and we'll be sharing from our experience working with merchants such as these to help you optimize your own fraud review process for the holidays. Today our goal is to provide you with information and advice that will help you optimize your manual fraud review process during the holidays. We will be covering how to reduce review times and keep manual review efficient, how to drive approval rates and sales, obviously, and how to best handle international or cross-border orders, which can be especially tricky. Feel free to ask questions at any stage via the GoToWebinar panel, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Before we dive in, just a couple more slides for context for those of you who didn't attend our previous webinars. I promise this will be short. So this illustrative graph is based on Riskified's own data from last year's holiday season, and what we're seeing here is the volume of incoming orders, and we can see there's a significant spike in volume over the holiday season, especially during those top online shopping days such as Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And what's interesting to see is that fraud rates, while the overall volume of incoming orders surged, fraud rates remained constant. They did not increase relatively to the overall volume. And that's because during the holidays, we have many more good customers looking to take advantage of the sales and complete their gift shopping, and not necessarily more fraud attempts at that time. So one of the main challenges that we have, as fraud prevention and management teams is to avoid chargebacks, of course, but we want to make sure we don't reject good customers or negatively impact sales revenue during this time. And in last week's webinar, we talked about automating the fraud review process to lighten the load on your manual review team. Because of the spike in volume, automation can really be a lifesaver over the holidays. So just to recap, some of the takeaways was use your team's insights to automate the approval of orders that they might otherwise be routed to manual review to help lighten the load on your team. So they know which orders are easily approvable, and maybe with their insights you can build in some more automatic approvals into your system. Another takeaway was that it's really important to adjust your risk models or rules for the unique characteristics of holiday shopping, whether it's higher order value, more next day shipping. So whatever rules or models you have in place that determine which orders are routed to manual review or which orders are approved or declined, you want to be sure to adjust them ahead of the holiday season. And lastly, you want to make sure that you're doing whatever you can to lighten the load on your team. So audit the data available to you. Try to make sure you incorporate whatever is available into your automation. And in general, our approach is we try to stay away from automatically declining orders just because the cost is so high. And we'll mention that a little bit later when we talk about decision accuracy. For anyone interested in hearing the webinar recording or any other of our educational webinars, the URL here is at the bottom of the screen for our resource center, and you will find the recording there. Okay, so sorry for that long intro, but let's dive in. And we're going to start with talking about manual review efficiency. So first of all, let's think, what negative impact can inefficient or inaccurate manual review have on your business, right? So if your manual review is not optimized, which is unfortunately often the case, and the price is higher during the holidays. So for example, if you're using payer authentication services such as 3D Secure, those are high friction and in some global markets have been shown to result in high drop-off rates. Other high-friction practices related to fraud prevention, such as reaching out to customers for additional information or to validate that they are indeed the rightful card holders, can lead to order cancellations and can drive your customers to instead purchase from your competitors. And we know competition is especially high during the holidays. On top of that, a lengthy manual review process can unfortunately lead also to shipping delays. And especially during the holidays when many more customers seek next day shipping, time sensitivity is heightened, and this is something we need to try and avoid as much as possible. The other side of manual review that has to do less with efficiency but more with accuracy is those false positive declines that we mentioned earlier. And we'll cover this in the next section, but in general, if you're falsely declining an order, you're not only losing the sales revenue from that specific transaction, since that customer is less likely to return to your shop, you will also be reducing the lifetime value from the customer. And of course, insulted customers, not something any of us want. Negative word of mouth, on social media, we all obviously want to avoid that. So let's dive in and talk about manual review times. So according to the Global Fraud Survey recently published by the Merchant Risk Council, and it's just a survey of online merchants and retailers, the average time that merchants reported for manually reviewing an order was 5.5 minutes. So that's pretty good, actually. And we were kind of happy to see this stat, but unfortunately we know that in many cases, fraud prevention teams have policies where orders are basically put on hold. And what I mean by that is that in case there's a certain data mismatch or in case the order is above a certain ticket value, the analysts or fraud team members are instructed to try to reach out to the customers and ask for a bank statement or ask for other documentation. And while that happens and while the team is waiting for an answer, the orders can in fact be put on hold for hours or even days. So this average of 5.5 minutes per order we don't think that really takes those hold or on hold issues into account. And so what we want to try and do is provide some information to help you reduce manual review times. So our first recommendation for you is to go back and review and analyze cases where an order was reviewed by your team for a long time, but was eventually approved. And when we say reviewed for a long time, it could also mean that it was on hold. And most of the time, if an order was approved after an hour or after a day, it could have been usually approved after a few minutes or even half an hour. And it's just, a lot of the time, it's a matter of who approved the order and what they were focused on, or in fact, what they were overlooking when reviewing the order. So review those orders, or assign a senior analyst on your team to go back and review these historical orders and try to figure out where your team gets stuck, right? So two scenarios, for example. The wrong person reviewed the transaction. So it should have been escalated to a senior analyst quickly, or it should have been assigned to a different team member to begin with. Another example, analyst took a long time reviewing other data points before getting to the helpful indicator that enabled the ultimate approval of the order. So based on the results of your analysis of those cases where you eventually approved an order after a long time, you can reduce review times. And the ways that we suggest doing that are better scheduling. So you want to ensure there are always enough experienced analysts on hand. And you want to have clear policies for who should be reviewing which types of orders. And in the first bootcamp webinar, when we talked about preparing your team to handle things well, we also gave some examples, right? Basically, you don't want senior analysts, quote unquote, wasting time on easy orders. But you also want to avoid the junior analysts from handling the more tricky transactions if you know a more experienced team member could review that and approve it more quickly. Secondly, you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to improve display and flagging. So what I mean by that is if you better display and flag information within your order or queue management system, this will allow your analysts to easily spot those data points or indicators that can help them approve orders more quickly. And lastly, you want to ensure your entire team knows how and when to make use of data enrichment tools. So for example, if you're using white pages, Email Age, and I'm sure everyone here is making use of several third-party tools, you really want to make sure everybody understands how and when to use them, and that can really help reduce review times going forward. So now that we've talked about reducing manual review times and making the process a little bit more efficient, let's talk about how to improve the accuracy of the decisions made by your manual review team. And given the fact that fraud remains pretty consistent during the holidays while overall volume surges, we'll be focusing on how to turn more of those declines into sales revenue. So Riskified is pretty well positioned to provide tips on this. Our technology was originally designed to approve high-risk transactions, and here what we see is our approval rates for orders that merchants had planned to decline otherwise. So what we see here is that, for example, on the left-hand side, in case there's a merchant with a strong fraud team that has spent a lot of time working to optimize this issue of false declines, we managed to, quote-unquote, convert approximately 40% of these declines into approvals. And on average, we managed to approve 66% of orders merchants typically decline. This is on top of merchants' existing fraud systems and tools. So how do we do this? It really starts with our approach. So telling the story. For every order, our systems and our analysts try to take into account all available data points and weigh what we call the good purchase story versus the fraudulent story. So do all of the details that we have for the order make more sense in the context of a fraud attempt or of a legitimate buyer? Would someone committing fraud have such a strong presence on social media and expose their location, right? So we try to take everything into account. And for example, some legitimate common explanations for otherwise suspicious or risky indicators could be a reshipper. So we see an order that from an address where we previously incurred a chargeback, or we see high velocity of orders being shipped to the same address. If we know that it's a reshipper, that can really help us explain the good story, right? It gives more weight to the good story. The other piece of advice is shifting your mindset. So in the field of online risk management, it's really easy to forget that the vast majority of these orders are actually good, right? If we want to reduce those false declines and be more accurate in our decisions to drive sales, this requires that we change our mindset. So we need to basically assume the order is legitimate until proven otherwise. If there is no reason to decline, you should consider approving the order rather than the other way around. But specifically, in order to reduce false positive declines during the holidays, we recommend reviewing the orders that were declined during the previous holiday season and trying to identify those cases that now, upon second look, you realize could have probably been approved. And it's probably best to give this task again to your most experienced analyst or analysts. Specifically, some indicators that might otherwise be suspicious but maybe make a little bit more sense during the holidays. So proxies or encrypted emails. We know many more people use these type of services today for privacy reasons. If you're seeing a proxy, remember, it could be a corporate server, right? So if, for example, I am a Google employee and I'm placing an order from my work computer, my connection will always seem to be as if it's from the company's servers in California, no matter in what office in the world I am located, right? People, during the holidays especially, people from outside the country, so international buyers, may be looking to enjoy sales available on your domestic site. So that's another good reason for proxy usage during the holidays. Multiple credit cards. So while multiple cards, high velocity is a quote-unquote classic fraud indicator, during the holidays, people will often max out their card buying gifts, or they might be looking to take advantage of a credit card rewards program. So they'll be trying to make purchases on purpose on multiple cards. Billing, shipping mismatches, or big distance between billing and shipping address. So we know many more people will be shipping gifts rather than purchasing for themselves during the holiday season. They might be shipping gifts back to their families, to friends, flying home for the holidays and shopping beforehand. And in general, our best practice is every time you decline an order, provide a reason for the decline. And then the conclusions of research into those declines will really have, or really can have, powerful impact on your bottom line, since any decrease in your decline rate means actually higher revenue for your business. Another way that we suggest going about reducing declines is to prepare a positive indicator cheat sheet, right? By searching for positive indicators within an order, your manual review team will be able to approve orders they might otherwise decline. And of course, we advise against approving or declining based on any single data point, but perhaps these positive indicators can help explain and strengthen that positive purchase story. So, for example, email domain. So it's harder actually to get access to some email domains. If you see a university or governmental email account, it's harder to create that email account or to get access unless you're actually at the university or government than it is to create a Yahoo account, right? Again, for example, if the email domain is yahoo.co.uk and the customer is located in the United Kingdom, that's also a positive indicator linking the information you have to the customer's identity. Another example, credit cards. So a Navy credit card, right? Credit card issued by the Navy shipping to a military base. Or, for example, a platinum credit card buying a high-end item. All of those matches that help you sort of make more sense of the good story and understand more about who is behind this order can help you approve more orders. And we can go into more detail at the end of this session if you have any specific questions about this list. But in general, try to think of what you can see within an order that would help you approve it. And then make sure your entire team is aware of that. It can be a cheat sheet, it can be physical, it can be on your computer, it doesn't really matter as long as everybody's on board and knows what to look for to approve more. The next topic that we want to cover today is international orders. So cross-border transactions will usually have more mismatches and require your team to be familiar with the buying patterns and data sources within the markets or countries from which the orders are being placed. And especially during the holiday season, it's important to make sure you're handling these orders efficiently and accurately and not letting them create a backlog in your queue. Of course, we want to make sure we're not wrongly rejecting orders and preventing our team from growing our customer base internationally. So again, we recommend reviewing orders from previous years and learning from your mistakes. So if you review prior chargebacks or declines by country, you can then target areas for improvement. So it's important also to remember you need to take time differences into account when you're scheduling analyst shifts. You also want to sync with your marketing team to understand whether you can expect to see traffic from new regions or markets this holiday season, and consider the relevant data sources you might want to incorporate in order to better handle those orders, whether it's IP scoring, proxy detection, etc. The next tip we have around international or cross-border orders has to do with data sources. So whether it's geographical data sources or social data sources, there are data sources out there that are unique to every market, and you want to be sure that you are familiar with the data sources relevant to your key markets. Make sure your team knows which data sources to use for which cases. If possible, integrate these data sources directly within your order management system so that data is displayed within the tool itself. And another important thing to remember is that Google shows different results based on your location. So some cases it might be worth for your analyst to use a VPN and see the relevant local results on the local search engine. So to wrap it up, our pointers for boosting the efficiency and accuracy of manual review over the holidays. So first of all, strive to minimize review times, right? Understand what caused you to get stuck with previous orders. Try to approve orders without reaching out to customers for additional validation or documents. You will want to identify the key markets for you this holiday season and come up with a strategy about the data sources, the tools, your scheduling, so that you'll be handling transactions better in an optimal way. You want to try to turn more of those no's into yeses. That requires shifting your mindset, right? Using the positive indicators outlook, and try to think of the legitimate explanation for otherwise suspicious indicators. Most importantly, you want to remember that the customer always comes first. This is always true, right? But especially during the holidays, we can't let fraud operations get in the way of a great shopping experience for our users, for our customers. There's too much competition out there, and consumers are more time sensitive than ever. So I really hope that you found this webinar valuable. We'll now open it up to questions. As a reminder, next week we will hold the fourth and last webinar in our bootcamp series, and based on the input that we got from you, thanks so much for filling out the survey. The topics we'll be covering will be how to review digital goods orders, more in-depth analysis on how you can increase approval rates, and our tips for handling consumer fraud. Of course, any other questions that were included in the survey and are not related directly to these topics we'll also get to. But let's open it now to your questions. So let me see all the questions that came up here, and there's still time if you want to write us within the GoToWebinar panel. So Alon, I'm going to start out by reading the few questions we already have here, and as they come in, I'll read in the following questions. Okay, so just a second, let me open it up. Okay, so someone is asking, you mentioned validation policies that cause orders to be on hold. Can you give an example? Alon, do you want to dive in?
Yeah, sure. So let's say every time you can find information about the customer on social media or elsewhere online, the usual policy would be to telephone the customer and ask them to provide a bank statement. If you're on a different time zone from the customer, they may not answer when you call, and it may take a while to hear back from them. Moreover, if the phone number or email address are wrong, even if they're off by a single digit, you'll be waiting for their answer forever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Next question here. So, Alon, would you say that reshippers are a positive indicator?
So this definitely depends on the context of the order. In some cases, where using a reshipper makes sense in the context of the customer's location, it can be a good indicator. For example, if your international shipping rates to certain countries could be high, or maybe there are certain countries you don't ship to, it makes sense that customers from that location would probably use a reshipper to lower the cost or simply to buy from your shop.
Mm-hmm.
However, we never recommend reaching a decision based on any single data point, right? We would recommend to take into account all the available data and then reaching a decision based on the context.
Mm-hmm. So in some cases, positive indicators, and in some other cases, not necessarily.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, so this is specifically about the cheat sheet. Why is a small town IP address a positive indicator?
Right.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so in general, when the customer exposes their identity and location, we believe there's a much lower chance of fraud. Fraudsters will most often try to conceal their true location and identity, right? Also, fraudsters would usually buy credit card details online and then try to find a proxy that somehow matches the shipping or billing address. It's more unlikely that they will both buy credit card details of someone living in a small town just because less people live there, and also manage to exactly match an IP address so close to the small town in the middle of nowhere, right? So there's still an issue with consumer fraud, which is a topic we address in our next webinar, but classic fraud is much less likely when we see it from an IP address of a small town.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, do we have any more questions coming in? Okay, I think that wraps up our questions. And just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We love talking about fraud and risk prevention, so if anybody wants to reach out, this is my email address. And we hope to see you again next Wednesday. Same time, and in any case, you will all receive the webinar recording. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.